All those companies advertising settle your tax debt for pennies on the dollar, it's not what you think. How's it going? My name is Eric. I run a tax and accounting company called The Cashflow Doctor. Been doing it for the last 15 years. I am answering burning Reddit tax questions I see on Reddit. So here's a question, or actually statement that came up. The offer in compromise is not what most people think. I deal with a lot of people who end up looking into offer and compromise, and most of the time, the issue isn't the IRS being difficult. It's that they waited too long or went in with the wrong expectations. A lot of people think that OIC means settle for pennies. But if your financials don't support it, it's not getting approved no matter how good your story is. Curious how many people here have looked into it or been told to go that route, and what your experience was. So this is a industry in the tax space that's grown dramatically in the last decade. And you see it advertised all the time. Settle your tax debt for pennies on the dollar. Joe owed $100,000 to the IRS. We settled for $2,000. And when you look at it, sometimes it makes you wonder. It's like, oh, well, is there a way for me to get out of my tax debt and pay the IRS much less than what I owe them? And I want to tell you straightforward and honestly that no, not always the case. So let's talk about what do these companies mean, or these advertisers mean, when they say we'll settle your tax debt for pennies on the dollar. So this is what we call an IRS negotiation, or basically a scrubbing process called the offer in compromise. Offer in compromise. And what the offer in compromise does is we put together an application to the IRS with a huge list of financials. It's typically a 10-page, what we call 433F, financial statement that breaks down everything. What do you have saved? What do you have in assets in your house? How much is your clothing worth? How much is your TV, your household goods, your car? What debts do you have? All these different things. And if you have a business, it gets even more complicated. And then from there, it allows the IRS to determine if you are still a collectible debt or a non-collectible debt. And what does that mean? A collectible debt basically means the IRS looks at your financials and says, this guy can still afford to repay us our taxes. So instead of doing offer and compromise, let's do an installment agreement, and let's waive some of the penalties maybe. But it's usually an installment agreement, or they'll put a lien or levy on your property and force you to sell or refinance to get that done. If we can show that you're effectively destitute, meaning there's very little assets or income that you have, and there's very little assets or income that is going to be expected for you in the future, then we could go to the IRS and say, hey, you're trying to collect from somebody who's non-collectible. They're willing to sell it for this dollar amount. Would you take it or not? And that's how an offer and compromise works. Now, typically, I don't know, I forget what the actual national average is, but it's something where it's like 1 out of 5 applications get approved for an offer and compromise. So there's a lot of folks out here that are watching these TV shows, these Instagram ads, and they think that they can go and negotiate with the IRS to reduce their tax debt. And that's not always the case. So when we work with clients that have tax debts or tax challenges, we try to go through their entire situation and just make sure we're looking at everything objectively, and also not over-promising and under-delivering, because that happens a lot. Now, if you're a person that still has a good job, or that has savings, right? The IRS is not gonna wipe out that debt. However, we can set up an installment agreement with the IRS to help pay that debt down over time and put it into a monthly payment that may be more affordable for you, right? That's something that we do for a lot of folks. We do negotiate those, and we can set up installment agreements where it starts off low, then starts ramping up in the next following year or so. That's often the best way of looking at things. Also, other things that we've done for clients, we look at what I call the statute of limitations. The IRS can only collect tax debts up to a period of 7 years. After that, the statute of limitations falls off, and that tax debt disappears. So if the IRS is still collecting on debt that is beyond the statute of limitations, we contact the IRS, let them know, hey, you guys can't collect on that anymore, but let's work on these upcoming current things, right? Other things that we do is we help make sure taxpayers are up to date with their taxes, so we could do an installment agreement. Now, sometimes there are cases where a offer in compromise makes sense, and it's not for everybody, right? an offer and compromise makes sense when I take a look at your financials and say, okay, I can clearly see there's no equity in the house, or you're upside down in your house, you're upside down in your car, you don't have any liquid cash, there's no business assets, and maybe you've been laid off and there's no job prospects, right? That's a really clear-cut case for me to do an offer and compromise with the IRS and negotiate and do a one-time lump sum payment to settle it. But that doesn't happen very often. Often, a lot of times, when people come to us with large tax debts, they're still running pretty successful businesses. They're still getting paid, right? They still have assets. The IRS will look at that, laugh, crumble it up, and say sorry, right? So that's how the offer and compromise process works. For us, what we do is we take all of your information, we take all of your financials, have you sign a 433-F, it's a financial collection statement, and then an offer and compromise application where we determine, okay, if we were to make a lump sum payment, and that's the only way I would typically fly, I wouldn't do an offer and compromise with an installment agreement. I would only do it with a lump sum because that will save you money. We will do an offer and compromise application with a lump sum, sign it all off. Typically takes the IRS, at least from my experience, between 8 to 12 months for it to get approved and to go through. If you fit into that range, we could absolutely help you do an offer and compromise. But for most folks, we'll probably do an installment agreement. But that's the offer and compromise process. A lot of folks are wondering, how does this work? Is this really true? Can I really settle my tax debt for pennies on the dollar? And just like with everything else at the IRS, it depends. It depends on your situation. Depends on the context and what we're working with. Anyway, I hope that answers at least your burning questions on offer and compromise, if these actually make sense. I hope that answers the statement from this Redditor on the offer and compromise process. And with that said, again, my name is Eric. I run a tax and accounting firm called The Cashflow Doctor, here to answer all of your burning tax questions. We do a lot of tax strategy and advanced tax related things. So if you have any questions or comments, put them in the comment section below. I would love to hear from you. Don't forget to put a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you again next time. Thanks a lot. Take care.